snowing on the nearby mountain ranges. It's raining and freezing cold. No way I can work on the house. But I've at last reached the stage of this project that particularly excites me. The building of the main bodywork for Raptor. This will chiefly comprise two large sections. First of all, a front nose cone incorporating the bonnet and the front mudguards, and a hinged rear section to cover the motor and the rear tyres. Why am I building bodywork on an off-road buggy? For practical reasons, I need to duct cold air through my twin radiators, and I also need to keep all the mud and debris off the rear tyres right away from them. For aesthetic reasons, it will mark the car's character and set it apart from all of the other buggies, and it'll also exercise my creative juices because I've never done anything like this before. I want a rear look reminiscent of a 1970s Trans Am sports car. The iconic Chaparral. Chaparral Cars was an American racing team of the late 1960s, founded by Formula One racer Hap Sharp and Jim Hall, who was a Texas oil magnate. Jim Hall and Chaparral were a leader in the innovation and design of spoilers, wings and ground effects on race cars. The Chaparral cars dominated the Can-Am series in 1966 and 1967 and went on to win the 12 Hours of Sebring that was run in a pouring rainstorm. The Chaparral 2 featured the innovative use of fiberglass as a chassis material. The rear of the 2J housed two 17-inch fans driven by a single 45 horsepower two-stroke snowmobile engine. It had a skirt made of Lex and extending to the ground on both sides and across the back of the car. These skirts were integrated with a suspension system so the bottom of the skirt would maintain a distance of 1 inch from the ground regardless of G-forces or the road surface. Nicknamed the sucker car, it usually ran at least 2 seconds quicker than its closest competitors, who were mainly McLaren, and McLaren lobbied until the car was banned. To invent my own ways of doing this from scratch as I go along. So join me to see how it turns out and what we can learn together as things develop. I admire those guys who sculpt exotic cars to exacting industry standards to make sure both sides of the car are perfectly symmetrical. But on a homegrown project like this, I'm not going to stress about things like that. The methods that I'm going to use are fairly simple, don't require any special tools, and are within the reach of most backyard budgets. Hopefully you'll be able to learn from any mistakes I make and be able to build bodywork for your own buggy. My starting point on making the rear bodywork has had to be getting both rear wheels right up on full compression to make sure that the bodywork will clear when the car's fully bottomed out. And then what I've done is I've put blocks on either wheel to get the minimum clearance that I want off the bodywork, which is 50mm. I put a bar over the top, which as luck would have it also clears the engine, and then I've made sure that that bar and the car itself are level. This gives me the height of the rear bodywork over the engine and where the mudguard clearance needs to be over the tyres. timber plates in front of the radiator openings, and I've got my timber tailboard in place. Somehow I have to cover the tyres, the suspension and the engine in a smooth flowing shape, and I want to do this easily. Here's an idea I've come up with. I think you're going to love it. I'm going to make my body out of foam rubber. I can sculpt that to shape. Get the flow that I want. And then I'll just fiberglass over the top of it lightly, and that'll give me my dye. I considered sealing the surface of this foam with plaster or poly resin, but instead I've settled on laying the fiberglass directly onto the foam itself. Rather than laying fiberglass directly over the tailboard or up to its edges and then laying the second stage moulding fiberglass onto the timber, I've covered it with this builder's scrap plastic. This will allow the fiberglass I'm going to lay now in making the die to release from the board and the chassis without having to undo this timber sheet that I've bolted to the car. Before I put the builder's plastic over the timber, I also painted it yesterday with some PVA release for some extra insurance. Normally you apply the fiberglass cloth itself dry onto a surface wet with resin, but with this job that'd mean starting by applying the resin to the foam itself, and most of the resin would be absorbed by the foam and be wasted. So instead I've made a disposable table on which I'll first impregnate resin onto the initial layer of cloth. Then I'll apply the wet CSM onto the foam in manageable pieces. I'm not sure if I'll apply all 3 layers of choppy this way, because I might be able to apply the second and third layers conventionally once the first one gels a bit. We'll see what happens and take it as it comes. How's this worked? Well, overall it's a success. I've got some bunching up occurring, but I've pushed it in areas like the centre of the radiator cowling where I'll cut it out. I've got a couple of areas where I just can't get those air bubbles out, but most of the car's okay. So that's the first layer on. I've now got a rigid surface to work with. Now people say, oh, working with fiberglass, it's filthy, hairy, messy stuff. I just got one thing to say about that. They're damn right. This has taken about 10 litres of resin, so it's really soaked it up, but I've now got a firm shell that I can work on and smooth out. My plan is to put the second layer of fiberglass on, and that should make it thick enough to make a removable shell.